progress in her new role as Uachtaráin. Agus Cín, Thank you. Now, I would also like to take this opportunity, members, and I'm sure you'll join me in passing condolences on the death of Sister Stanislaus Kennedy yesterday. And we all know what an extraordinary impact Sister Stan had on Irish society and how she had led a life dedicated to the service of those in need. And I'd like to take the opportunity to offer my condolences to her family on behalf of members and many friends. Thank you. Thank you. And we will now move to leaders' questions. I call on Deputy MaryLouMcDonald.
Grumaigat agus cogorgus ó crí le ar gara Teachtara Catherine Connolly. It's a truly historic achievement, and our warmest congratulations to our Uachtaráin-elect Catherine Connolly. I'd like also to pay tribute to Sister Stanislaus Kennedy, who passed away yesterday. Sister Stan championed social justice. She advocated for the homeless. She spent her entire life standing on the side of those in need. She gave gentle yet powerful voice to the voiceless. She never stopped working for a fair and equal society. She leaves an incredible legacy of compassion, of activism and of hope. Yeshe Gorev Ahanam. Minister, your government's Energy Task Force published its interim report yesterday, confirming people's worst fears. Households will be hit with massive electricity bills this winter, with average yearly bills approaching €2,000. The barrage of electricity price hikes from big energy companies puts people under huge pressure in the run-up to Christmas. 300,000 households are unable to pay their electricity bills. Household energy arrears have almost doubled in the last 4 years. Many, many more will now be pushed into this awful situation. Your decision to strip away energy credits was a terrible call in a terrible budget. A budget of €9.4 billion that has left working people worse off. That is some going, Minister. And whilst people are so brazenly ripped off, what's your big idea? Well, a promise to make an announcement of a plan sometime next year with action to follow, God knows when, if at all. Households are being fleeced right here and right now. These huge bills are already landing, and yet you pretend like it's not happening. Government failure to tackle energy rip-offs leaves people in desperate situations. Families using prepay meters going days without electricity. Households relying on organisations like the St. Vincent de Paul to keep the lights on. You sit back and you allow big energy companies to rip people off at every opportunity. And now, as the days get darker, families will be forced to cut back on necessary electricity use, counting the cost every time they use the washing machine, feeling pressure every time they flick on the light switch because they know it's costing them a fortune. Can I ask you, Minister, do you think that's an acceptable way for people to live? The big question for me is this: how many wake-up calls does your government need before you act? 4 energy companies announced big electricity price hikes. You do nothing. The International Energy Agency reports that energy companies are fleecing Irish households. You do nothing. The CSO releases figures proving that people are being ripped off. You still do nothing. And now your own task force confirms that households will be hit with massive electricity bills over the coming weeks, and you still do nothing. Worse still, you actually have the neck to tell people to wait until next year for some pie-in-the-sky plan. Not alone is this government in action woefully out of touch, it's downright lazy, Minister. This is a lazy, do-nothing government, incapable of understanding how these huge bills impact on people's lives, and so you don't even muster up the effort to do anything about it. And that's not good enough. Your job is to stand up to those companies, to end this energy rip-off, to support households. Mar tá gevra lán de vili electricus royer in on the chowli. Cahi an realtas shasiv Susan Ig Nicola Coacti Mora Fuinev August Taku le Chili. So my question, Minister, is this: given the scale of this crisis, will you now act to reinstate energy credits to help households? And what action will you now take to rein in energy companies and to put an end to the scandalous rip-off?
Minister Chambers.
Thanks very much, Ken Corla, and on behalf of the entire government, I want to sincerely congratulate and offer my best wishes to President-elect Catherine Connolly following her election victory. It's an enormous victory for her, her family, all of her supporters. I know many people across County Galway and beyond. Catherine commanded a huge vote following a really successful campaign. And just to say as well, she served with distinction in these houses as Lascount Corla. In all her contributions, she demonstrated enormous integrity, professionalism. I can speak when I previously held the brief as Minister of State for the Gaeltacht, someone who was always constructive in her contributions. I know she's a president that we can all unite behind. I want to wish her well as she commences her new role in the coming days. And just to speak to the loss of Sister Stan, who's had such a positive impact on so many people for so long. She dedicated her life to working with care and compassion on behalf of the poor and the vulnerable across our country. She showed that innate desire and unflinching determination to support those who needed the most help. Hers was a voice of charity, of care, of compassion, and of devoted service to people. And our thoughts are with her, family on her loss today. To your question, Deputy MacDonald, this government did take action in the budget when it came to the issue of energy. That's why the work that Minister Donoghue did when it came to keeping the 9% VAT rate on gas and electricity was something that was a significant part of our overall tax package. When it came to the fuel allowance being increased by €5 and being expanded for those in receipt of the working family payment, making a targeted approach to those who are feeling the pressure of energy prices across our economy. Also, other interventions by government, an additional 50,000 households will be eligible for fuel allowance. That's 460,000 households, or 26% of all households are now eligible for fuel allowance. And when you take the wider interventions we've made in terms of supporting children and families, the increase of the child support payment, and other measures in the context of the Department of Social Protection, next year the Department of Social Protection will have an overall allocation of over €28 billion. If you take our overall broader spending across our economy, this government, a €2 billion package of social protection was made in Budget 2026 to respond back to the pressure that many households face, but to target it for those most in need. And that's the context in which we set about trying to help mitigate the impact of energy prices. Minister O'Brien has done extensive work as part of the National Energy Affordability Task Force, and that has set out a number of recommendations in the context of, if you take the programme for government, we've set out changes in assessment of the overall regulatory model when it comes to energy prices in our economy, and that's work that he'll undertake. But also, if you see the National Development Plan, our continued investment in the Warmer Home Scheme, hundreds of millions of euro to support families when it comes to the Warmer Home Scheme and many of the other interventions there to support low-income households. But when it comes to the interventions we made in the budget, we made significant interventions as part of our social protection package, as part of our retention of the 9% VAT rate on gas and electricity. And we made a decision not to continue one-off temporary payments because we have to be honest about managing the overall budgetary parameters and the need to manage expenditure policy out to the medium term. And every decision we made, we want to be sustainable, affordable and permanent. And it is not sustainable to continue one-off payments over the existing allocations. And that's why we've made specific and targeted interventions in the context of our social protection package.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Deputy MacDonald.
Well, Minister, I'll tell you what's not sustainable. It's not sustainable to tell families that are struggling so badly now that your only response is to refer them to the National Development Plan and budgetary parameters and whatever other political jargon you've got written down there, and you put a place onto the record of the Dáil. Do you understand how widespread this experience is? You keep talking about targeted measures. Do you understand how widespread the experience is now for households that can't make their bills? I've told you already, and you know, that 300,000 households are already in arrears. I've told you that energy companies have hiked their prices upwards and upwards with no real substantive challenge from any of you. They can do what they want. I've told you that now, in the run into Christmas, families now, not next year, now, in November, in December, cannot make it, and you simply sing dumb. I find that astonishing. Astonishing that you are that out of touch.
Thank you, Deputy
We
Minister.
need action now.
Minister
We need
to
the
respond.
energy credits as an immediate response, but you need to take
Way
on
over,
these
Deputy.
energy companies and you need to face them down.
I fully understand the issues and the pressures families face, and I reject your assertion of jargon and waffle talk that you've mentioned there. We absolutely understand the pressure, and that's why the social protection package was significant in this budget. When it came to fuel allowance, when it came to the changes in rates that we've made, and the changes Minister Donoghue made when it came to VAT 9 on gas and electricity. And I won't take lectures from you on the economy. A magic money tree doesn't work. No, your alternative budget amounted to nearly €16 billion. So your economic approach would wreck our economy, would lose jobs, would deplete our country of resources, and your false promises and your reckless approach to economic management wouldn't provide any future for any family, and would seriously put poverty and exacerbate it for many people. So I won't take any lectures from you on economic management. And we made changes. We made changes that are progressive, that are fair, and are targeted at the lowest income households. And if you see the social protection package, it reflects that.
Deputy Ivana Bacik. Thank you. Thank you, Deputy.
Gurmagad Ceann Comhairle dús cogargicus more to our new Uachtaráin Heron Catherine Connolly on her historic landslide win. I know as President she will do us proud, just as Michael D. Higgins has done. I also want to acknowledge Ceann Comhairle the loss of the great sister Stan. She did the state immense service through her work on social justice, and she leaves a truly remarkable legacy. May she rest in peace. Minister Chambers, I want to condemn in the strongest possible terms the attack on an IPAS centre in Drogheda on Friday. The lives of children were seriously endangered in the setting of a deliberate fire. And 2 babies, including one who was only 20 days old, were hospitalised in what was a hideous criminal attack. I know my colleagues in Drogheda, Deputy Jed Nash, and Councillors Michelle Hall and P.O. Smith are working to support all those affected. And I want to pay tribute to the courage of the firefighters who saved lives on Friday night. But Minister, in the context of that horrific attack and the awful riot in City West, I want to raise 2 matters with you today. The first is how we stamp out racist violence, and the second is the way in which government policy and rhetoric emanating from members of this House can stoke anti-immigrant sentiments that form the thin end of what is a wicked, violent wedge. More than 300 IPAS and Ukraine accommodation centres operate across the country, Minister, as we know, and they are people's homes. But dozens of times now, in recent years, residents have faced attacks and violence in what are modern-day pogroms. In my own constituency, I work with volunteers who are dealing with knife attacks on men forced to sleep in tents due to your failure to house them. So the state must step in. And Minister, the government must now undertake an urgent security review of all centres where refugees or people seeking asylum are living. Completing this work in advance of the 2nd anniversary of the Dublin riots would be an appropriate deadline. But second, Minister, we need a reflection and a review of the language used in policies implemented by your government. Because the conflation of immigration with criminality and rhetoric can contribute to an environment where violence can develop. And so too can irresponsible rhetoric that blames the housing crisis or the lack of public services on immigrants. And regrettably, all 3 largest parties in this House, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Sinn Féin, have recently issued communications that have lent into anti-migrant sentiment. These are not comments from rogue members in government either, in the case of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. This week, the Taoiseach said our migration numbers are too high, and he implied that people facing deportation make up a significant proportion of Ireland's inward migration. And of course, this was wrong. It wasn't a slip of the tongue, though, and Fine Gael colleagues have since repeated it, and indeed your party leader, the Taoiseach, has backed him. Minister, you're in government. Any flaws in the asylum system are your responsibility. Your party colleague holds the Justice and Migration brief, and so blame for any failure to provide fair and effective procedures lies not at the feet of people seeking asylum, but with your government and with previous governments. So, Minister, will you undertake a safety audit of accommodation, and will you now advance a public information campaign on the benefits to this country of inward migration and the facts about immigration?
Thank you very much, Deputy Bacik. And the shocking and disgraceful recent attacks we've seen, including in Drogheda at the weekend and City West before that, should serve as a stark reminder to everyone in this House how carefully and responsibly we must be when discussing and debating immigration policy. These disgraceful attacks are not reflective of the views of the overwhelming majority of our people, whose first instinct is one of compassion for those people being subjected to intimidation and revulsion towards those carrying out these attacks. Our people across our country are proud that Ireland is a tolerant, multicultural and diverse country, and they recognise how reliant our economy, our public services and our communities are and are the contribution from those in migrant backgrounds. I see it in my own constituency, one of the most diverse constituencies in the country, and I want to thank the enormous contribution that many people who've come here make to our economy, make to our communities and make to our society. And we need to be clear in that in all our discussions when it comes to migration. I know Minister Donoghue is publishing the Future 40 report today, which speaks to the huge contribution that many of the migrant community make to our economic growth, and our continued success as an economy is dependent on attracting the talent and the people who make that contribution. But I think it's also important to be clear, Deputy, that everybody in this House should be able to have a broader debate on what system of migration we have. And everyone on this side of the House shares with you the views on having a compassionate, caring approach to anyone who comes here, and then being treated with humanity and dignity, and many of them who've come from vulnerable places. And just to be clear about that. And the Taoiseach just said that in the context of his remarks. The Taoiseach said migration is a good thing. But he just was making broader remarks on what system we have. And we should be able to have a mature debate about how what type of system we have. We're clear on it being a rules-based system, having a system of enforcement. And it's important that we have that in the context of managing a complex issue globally and everywhere else. And that's why there's constant evaluation of the various factors which are contributing to overall migration into our country. And Minister O'Callaghan has been proactive across a number of measures he's made, whilst also sending a strong message on the contribution that many people who've come here make to our economy. So to your question, there is a security review, and that's part of the wider work that goes on with any centre that becomes applicable for IPAS. And to be clear, this government, I think, shares with you your perspective on how we treat people. But it's important that we also have are able to have a debate on how we have a balanced approach and one that's fair, and also manages the consequences for those who aren't given status.
Thank you, Minister.
And there needs to be consequences for those who aren't given status if they've appealed and they aren't allowed to stay.
Deputy Bacik.
They need to be managed in the context of a functioning migration system.
Thank you, Minister.
And that's the broader context in which this
Deputy
debate should be
Bacik.
had.
Well, Minister, I thank you for your careful and responsible words in your response. And you're absolutely right that people, of course, must be able to debate migration policy, but let's do so in a fact-based manner. Let's use careful and responsible language. And I certainly don't think that the Taoiseach's conflation of all migration with this tiny number of people who are facing deportation orders, I don't believe that was responsible. You've acknowledged the reality that the majority of migrants, the vast majority of people who've migrated to Ireland, are here to work. that our schools and our hospitals are staffed by people who've come here to provide an essential service, who are propping up our creaking healthcare, education, nursing home systems. That's what we all know to be the case. So why is there this focus in government rhetoric on scapegoating those who come here seeking asylum and somehow conflating them with the vast majority of people who are coming through a different means entirely? Just this week, Minister, we're seeing the Cabinet agreeing a mean-spirited rent payment for people who've been fleeing Putin's brutal war in Ukraine. Not a revenue-raising measure, rather Fine Gael sources have admitted this is designed to disincentivise people fleeing war from coming here. So, Minister, can we have a fact-based information campaign to provide an evidence basis for debate on migration, please?
Deputy, I think you're conflating lots of different things unfairly and inappropriately. I think it's important everyone in this House should be able to have an honest, open debate about migration policy. And government needs to examine incentives and disincentives and push and pull factors in the context of migration policy which exists in Europe and internationally. And every policy should be evaluated and recalibrated to manage the various factors which contribute to the overall levels of migration into an economy, whilst also acknowledging the huge contribution that people continue to make to our economy, to our communities. And I think it's just unfair to take a particular sentence and try and conflate what has happened in a shocking manner in certain instances. So that's why Minister O'Callaghan is correct in continuing to evaluate our migration policy, to examine the wider factors which are contributing to significant increases, and those who are working and are in centres should make a contribution. That's fair, that's proportionate. I think that's the right policy approach. And I think anyone in this House would agree, if you've income and you've means to make a contribution, you should make a contribution. I think most people across our country would support
Deputy
that.
Holly Cairns.
Good Margaret. Ceann Comhairle, for decades, Sister Stan has been a campaigner and advocate for the most marginalised in our society. We could all learn from her, and our thoughts are with her and her family today. I also want to congratulate President-elect Catherine Connolly. She will be a president for all, and she'll be missed in this House, but I think we know that she'll serve with the same integrity, diligence and compassion than she did inside here. The House is on fire. Please answer. This is what a terrified 12-year-old child texted to her mum on Friday after an arson attack on her home, an IPAS centre in Drogheda. In total, 28 people lived in that IPAS centre, the majority of them women and children. 4 children, including a 2-week-old baby, had to be rescued from the top floor of the building. Little children who came to this country seeking sanctuary, now terrified and traumatised and living in fear. Minister, this is where anti-immigrant and racist rhetoric have led us. A violent attack on vulnerable people which could easily have led to children being killed. I want to commend the emergency services in Drogheda for their quick action. I also want to acknowledge that the majority of people in Drogheda and across the country are disgusted by what happened, because this attack is a new low. But is anyone surprised that it's come to this? There have been 30 arson attacks on IPAS centres or proposed centres in recent years. We have witnessed rioting on our streets, and there have been numerous public order incidents at protests outside IPAS centres. And Minister, what has the government's response been to this increasingly volatile atmosphere? To ratchet up its use of inflammatory language and stoke further fears. Mere days after rioting broke out in City West, Simon Harris suggested migration numbers, including the number of people here on work permits, were too high. And then, after the despicable arson attack on Friday night, the government moved immediately to talking about charging those in direct provision for accommodation. You couldn't make it up. Not to mention a callous proposal to reduce accommodation entitlements for people from Ukraine to just 30 days has also just been signed off. Minister, where is the emergency stand-alone meeting on safety concerns for people in international protection? Where is the emergency meeting about increasing levels of violent hate in our communities? And where is the emergency meeting to discuss how to counter the dangerous lies being peddled by far-right agitators online? Ceann Comhairle, this government has failed miserably to deliver on its own commitments on housing and critical public services, but instead of taking responsibility for that, you're now pointing fingers at immigrants, state agencies and the latest Fall Guy EU red tape. This is straight out of the Farage playbook, and it's deeply concerning the government is taking this approach. The reality is the numbers seeking international protection are way down this year. And people remain trapped in the system for too long because of this government's mismanagement of it.
Minister.
Is the government reflecting on its own communication around this, Minister? And has the security audit of IPAS centres started?
Minister, please.
Okay, I think you heard me respond to Deputy Bacik in the context of the shocking and disgraceful attacks which have happened in Drogheda and in City West, and I'm very clear to anyone listening about the positive contribution that many members of the migrant community make to our country, to our economy, to our society and to our communities, and that is the position of this government and all members of this government in terms of wider integration and migration policy. To your question, the Cabinet Committee considers wider matters, and that's why we, to the point I raised with Deputy Bacik, we should be able to assess overall migration policy continuously and evaluate it to look at European norms. And Minister O'Callaghan is constantly doing that in his engagement with colleagues across the European Union to look at the wider incentives and disincentives and the push and the pull factors. And that's a normal part of migration policy across Europe. And we should be able to have a separate, honest evaluation of that continuously, so we're able to manage the overall numbers that are coming into our country. And that's not dismissing the need for migrants and to make their ongoing contribution to our economy, but we need to be able to have an honest debate about that. And I'm clear in my absolute condemnation of what's happened. The Gardaí did an excellent job. There's constant community engagement happening on the ground across many of these centres. If you take the response in City West, in Drogheda, the Gardaí, I think, played an excellent job. And the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, the Minister for Justice and others were universal in their condemnation with what has happened in these recent attacks. And you didn't say that in your opening remarks. You ignored that in your opening remarks. And you've sought to cloud this issue and trying to conflate two separate everybody in government condemns what happened in Drogheda. And I think well, I think that's very unfair. And what I'm saying is, you know, the government and everyone in this government and everyone in this Parliament should be able to have an overall assessment of migration policy, and that's what I'm saying. And we need an honest debate about that continuously, because there are various factors which contribute to a surge in applications, and we need to be able to evaluate that. So I reject what you've said in trying to conflate these issues. It's unfair. And the work that Minister O'Callaghan is doing is as focused on community engagement through An Garda Síochána and the various supports that we have on the ground as it is the wider issues in terms of migration policy. The attacks have been disgraceful, and I want to reiterate my view that and to acknowledge the ongoing contribution that many people continue to make in our communities across our country. And we value their presence, we value their contribution and their continued work and presence in our country, and they need to feel safe and feel welcomed.
Thank you, Minister.
And we'll be doing everything we can to protect
Deputy
them.
Cairns.
The government can't stoke fear in one breath, then condemn attacks in another breath, and then actually come in here and seek credit for doing that. Minister, the Social Democrats have been pleading with the government for weeks to moderate your language, to ensure that what you're saying is accurate and the tensions aren't further inflamed, but instead the inflammatory language from government has increased. Shamefully, the Taoiseach chose to amplify half-truths to paint migrants in a negative light. He made those comments fully conscious of the volatile atmosphere that is out there. It's not just irresponsible, it's reprehensible. Now we see rising hate where rising hate naturally leads. A man pouring petrol on the stairs of an IPAS centre in the hopes of burning women and children alive. If this horrific event isn't enough to prompt the government to engage in some reflection, then I don't know what is. The government now has a deliberate strategy of depicting international protection applicants as scammers gaming a lax system.
Deputy.
This is not leadership. This is leaning into a toxic far-right narrative. People have a right to come here and to make an application for international protection, and the government has a duty to assess those claims fairly.
To respond,
Minister, will the government show leadership on this issue and deliver that clear and unambiguous message?
To respond. Minister, please.
Look, I reject that completely. I think if you've listened to what I've said, I reject the politics of the far right, of Farage, of anyone who provides an inflammatory response or weaponises this issue to divide people. Our focus is on community, is on building harmony between people and supporting and investing in communities, whilst also ensuring we have a migration system and policy which works. And that's why we should have an ongoing evaluation. I think it's unfair to continue to conflate this as you've had. Well, the experience of the women and the children in that house and the threat that was brought upon them is shocking and is universally condemned by this government. And that's why the work that Minister O'Callaghan is doing in terms of the Gardaí's contact and security reviews which happen for IPAS centres is really important. It's why community engagement is centrally important. And I'm disgusted, as everyone is, with what has happened. And I know even over the summer, some of the attacks on certain members of the Indian community as well, there was fear, I know in my community in West Dublin, amongst many of the migrant members of our community. And we need to again reinforce to them the need to support them and promote safety in all aspects of our response.
Deputy Peadar,
and community is at the centre of that.
Gur míle mágad a ceann comhairle. Bhfuilm sa dús freisin má cógordas ulmhór a gháil le Catherine Connolly an bua ionntach a bhí aici an seachtain sicáte agus guim gach rá arthaí agus má cóbhrón freisin do Sister Stan Lake a bhaí a dubar go dígrasach son ísú a bhí gan dídon sa tír seo agus dhéisté go raibh anam dílis. Agus bhfuilm freise iad siúd a chur an teach IPAS trí hinne in rithe dátha a chána go hullmhór freisin, ba beag nar fuairpáistí agus tuismitheoirí bás sa teach sin an nithe. Minister, this morning, commuter traffic on the M3 going to Dublin was backed up well into County Meath. The journey for tens of thousands of people took 2 hours. Meath is the biggest commuter county in the country. Meath is the only county in the country where the majority of workers actually leave the county to go to work every single day. 90,000 people commute to work in Meath on a daily basis, and 60,000 of those are forced to use the cars for a lack of rail line. Navan is the biggest town in the country without a rail line at the moment. In 1994, Fianna Fáil's Noel Dempsey promised to build a rail line between Navan and Dublin. The delivery date slipped and slipped. We were promised to have it in 2015, but it never got built. Now, I'm the chair of the Meath on Track campaign, and the people of Meath have campaigned strongly for this over the years, and yet we still don't have that rail line. In 2021, it was promised to us again. We were told that in 2030 we would have the rail line start to be built, and it will be built by 2036. Now, I have to say this promise was met with derision in County Meath. To be honest, it's typical Horizon politics, so far in a distance that it never gets done. But 2036 is 42 years since the rail line was first promised by Fianna Fáil. Now, in 1862, the original Navan to Dublin rail line was built in 3 years with picks and shovels. And all the technology we have at the moment, and that project is now heading towards 42 years. It's incredibly glacial in its delivery. Now, the economic cost of the congestion in the Greater Dublin area is incredible. €336 million was the cost of it in 2024, according to the Department of Transport. And it's estimated that by 2040, congestion in the Greater Dublin area will cost €1.5 billion. And there's been studies done in relation to the congestion in European cities, and Dublin is the worst in terms of time and in terms of cost. There's also been studies in terms of the speed of traffic in Dublin at the moment. The average speed 8 years ago was 12 kilometres. Now, the average speed of horse-drawn carriages in the 19th century in Dublin was 16 kilometres. We're at an incredible crisis currently in terms of infrastructure in the Dublin area. Now, I would like to ask you, why is it that this government cannot deliver infrastructure on time? Why is it that we have the slowest planning, the slowest permits, the slowest judicial reviews and the slowest tendering in the whole of the European Union in terms of these projects. When will the Lavender to Dublin rail line be built, and what will you do to stop the glacial pace of infrastructure in this country?
To respond. Please, Deputy.
Thanks very much, Deputy Toibin. And what I'd say relating to transport specifically, there's been a big uplift in the transport allocation for the next 5 years. 22 billion of the over 100 billion being invested in the next 5 years is in transport specifically, on building more roads, ensuring that our public transport objectives get delivered, and there's going to be a serious transformation of transport investment over the next 5 years. But you're correct in saying additional allocations in themselves will do very little to change how we deliver infrastructure across our economy. And that's why over the coming weeks we'll publish a series of actions which to be implemented in 2026, which will accelerate the delivery of infrastructure across our economy. It means rebalancing regulation in our economy, reassessing a lot of the rules, the processes and the structures which aren't working, are delaying decision making, and are adding cost rather than value when it comes to the cost of projects when they come to be delivered and be procured. So there's reforms which will introduce from a legislative perspective on critical infrastructure and on trying to advance that in a much greater and quicker way. Secondly, we'll be examining the role of our regulators and ensuring there's a duty to cooperate across many of our regulators whom at the moment are part of a sequencing of delays which undermines the delivery of infrastructure across our economy. And I think that, and I'll be able to show that in the coming weeks, the difference that will make in the context of delivery of infrastructure. You know, you referenced the Navan rail line. Obviously, there was reduction in capital expenditure when the economy contracted, and that contributed to delays to many of the projects which you've referenced. That has been part of the previous National Development Plan, and part of what we're trying to do now is match sectoral investment plans in transport and other areas with new shortened timelines so we can better deliver transport infrastructure. Minister O'Brien is working on with Minister Canny on a sectoral investment plan for transport in our economy, which seeks to match this very serious allocation. We're nearly spending €1 in 4 in capital in the next 5 years on transport, which is one of the biggest investments in public transport and in our road network for many, many years. And part of it is to try and match that with a credible pipeline of projects which we can deliver over a period of years, whilst also trying to set out a new delivery mechanism into the early 2030s for projects that need to go through planning and procurement. So he'll be able to set out further detail from in terms of the transport sector and investment plan. And this new approach to infrastructure delivery is about rebalancing risk. And you're often in here attacking public servants and others and politicians, and people have a role in ensuring accountability where there's excessive spend on particular projects. But it's also important we rebalance the risk appetite so we address risk aversion in decision making. And that means we've got to take extra risk when it comes to delivery of infrastructure and other projects across our economy.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Toibin to respond.
See, the problem is, Minister, if you take the future tense out of your statements there's very little that the government can say. But you're in government for so long at this stage, and these particular problems in planning and judicial reviews and in tendering, you know, they just haven't appeared out of nothing. They have been as a result of your government's implementation. But one of the big frustrations that exists amongst commuters in this country is that on one level they're getting the stick of extra costs. Commuters paid last year $1.9 billion in motor tax and VRT. They contributed to $4.1 billion in fuel taxes last year. And just last week, you put up the cost of tolls again. On an M50 that commuters have paid €2.2 billion on already. Mind you, those two bridges cost £53 million to build in the first place. Those commuters have paid for those bridges over and over again, and yet your government is using the stick on those commuters by putting up that price again, instead of using the carrot in actually providing the necessary public transport that they want to be able to use. And that's where the major frustration is. The government at one level cannot develop infrastructure because the systems are grinding to a halt with bureaucracy and red tape. And on another level, the government is using a stick to try and get people out of cars. And that stick is impoverishing many, many people.
Thank you, Deputy Toibin. Minister.
Yeah, well, look, I acknowledge in some instances there is excessive bureaucracy and red tape, and we need to cut it and remove it and reform it. And that's central to my work beyond what's happened in the National Development Plan, You're correct. We do need to radically reduce the timelines that it takes to deliver critical projects and housing across our economy. There's too many layers, too many barriers to delivery of that. And I acknowledge in many of the commuter counties I work with my colleague Deputy Dempsey on this when it comes to the Navan Rail Line and other priorities in Meath, in Kildare, in Wicklow, in Louth and other commuter belt regions where many people have a long commute to work. And part of the transformation of our transport system in the next 5 years is to ensure that the project pipeline gets delivered quicker because we have put a record level of allocation beside transport when it comes to the prioritisation we've given it. When it comes to tolls, the contribution that tolls make is on the maintenance of our national road network. And our national road network needs to be maintained to a standard, and there's a cost of doing that. And that's part of the position when it comes to the toll rates that TI set every year.
Thank you. And that concludes Leaders' questions. And in accordance with Standing Order 35, I now call on the Chief Whip, Mary Butler, to move the arrangements for this week's business and that they be agreed to. Chief Whip. Thank you. Are the proposed arrangements for this week's business agreed to? Not agreed. Deputy MacDonald.
I would like to, under Standing Order 35.3, propose an amendment to the Order of Business. Ceann Comhairle, the current nitrates derogation expires in a matter of mere weeks, and the government's handling or mishandling of the issue, leaving negotiations with the EU to run down to the wire, means that farmers face a possible serious cliff edge in January. So I'm asking that time be allocated in this week's schedule to debate this crucial issue for the future of Irish agriculture.
Thank you, Deputy Stewart, or excuse me, Deputy Smith.
Ceann Comhairle, since the last Business Committee meeting met, there has been the company Fastway Couriers has gone into receivership, resulting in the loss of 1,000 jobs in almost every constituency in the country. We need urgent statements because this isn't as tragic as every job loss is. There are a number of competing factors here which point to huge gaps in our workers' rights legislation that need urgent debate, as well as when will these workers, many of whom are on unusual franchisee contracts, will get compensation.
Deputy Gibney.
Ceann Comhairle, and families up and down the country are struggling with energy affordability, and despite the fact that this government and the previous government have failed to act on that, failed to invest in the grid and in renewable energy, what we see yesterday is a report of another toothless task force that's telling us that they'll put forward recommendations next year. We need immediate statements on it this week to discuss what action can be taken to provide targeted measures that will actually support people now and help them survive this winter.
Deputy Murphy.
Thanks. Wrote to the Business Committee seeking debate on safety for asylum seekers after we saw the horrific attack, what seems to be attempted murder, attempted burning of a baby and children alive in Drogheda. Not an isolated incident, but one of over 30 arson attacks on asylum centres in what we've seen a campaign of far-right terror in this state. We need to be debating it, and there is a direct line between the dog whistling of government leaders, the scapegoating of asylum seekers based on misinformation, a direct line between that and the creation of a hostile environment.
Thank you very much. Minister, next week sees the inauguration of our new President, and I wish Catherine Connolly the very best in her presidency. This will mean a by-election in Galway West. We in Independent Ireland strongly believe that this by-election should take place immediately, and to facilitate this, we already have put forward our candidate, Councillor Noel Thomas, who is working on the ground as we speak.
Thank you, Deputy.
Minister, can we debate here this week as to how soon will the writ be moved so that the people of Galway West will get the representation they fully deserve?
Chief Whip, please, to respond. Chief Whip.
I have to commend Deputy Collins for not missing an opportunity. So I've heard and taken notes on all the issues that were raised. Deputy Murphy, I believe what you have raised is covered under tomorrow's statements on international protection, processing and enforcement. It will be on for 3.5 hours. Minister O'Callaghan has taken it. You will have the opportunity to raise your concerns about safety then.
Deputy, it's not
because
I'd have to.
No, there's no need to. You can still raise it under that. I've taken on board what has been asked in relation to
energy, the fastway couriers, and in relation to the nitrate delegation, which we had a lengthy discussion on this morning, and all will be considered, all are important and will be considered at the business meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Whip. Are the proposed arrangements agreed to? Agreed. Thank you, deputies. Not agreed. Okay. I'll put the question that the proposed arrangements for this week's business are hereby agreed. Nichakti atá herv na tashkin o abradish tá. Nichakti atá in a quin abradish neil. Hilam goil an kesh richa. Very good. We move now to questions on policy or legislation.